The morning silence in Pinecrest Valley broke with urgent radio static. "We've found something," a rescuer's voice cracked through the handheld device. The autumn sun had just begun to peek through the dense Colorado pines when the search team stumbled upon the scene. There, in a small clearing, lay a German shepherd, fur matted with blood and dirt, one eye missing, curled protectively around something, the dog's remaining eye amber and fierce despite its weakened state, fixed upon the approaching rescuers with a warning glare. Its body trembled with exhaustion, yet still it growled, shielding its precious cargo. "Easy now," whispered Search Captain Reynolds, inching closer. As the team edged forward, they saw what the loyal shepherd guarded a small hand, pale and still, protruding from beneath the dog's protective curl. "Dear God," someone gasped. "It's the Wilson boy." Well, leave a like and share your thoughts in the comments along with the city you're watching from now. Let's continue with the story. Shadow hadn't always been a stray. The 7-year-old German shepherd's powerful frame, despite its current state of malnourishment, still carried the dignified bearing of his training. His coat, once glossy black and tan, now appeared dull and patchy. The most striking feature was his missing right eye, the socket now a permanent scar surrounded by gray fur, giving him an appearance that made most people cross the street when they saw him coming. But those who looked closely enough might notice the precision in his movements, the way he assessed situations with military calculation, behaviors that couldn't be unlearned even after years on his own. Shadow had been elite, a specially trained K-9 unit that had served alongside America's finest until that fateful operation went wrong. Ethan Wilson was everything Shadow was not small, innocent, and sheltered. At 5 years old, with sandy blonde hair and wide blue eyes, Ethan possessed the kind of curiosity that both delighted and terrified his mother. His slight frame and asthma condition made him physically vulnerable. But there was a quiet determination in the boy that drew others to him. He had his father's stubborn chin and his mother's compassionate eyes. Melissa Wilson had built her life around two passions, her son and her work as a veterinarian at Pinecrest Animal Rescue. At 36, the strain of single motherhood showed in the premature lines around her eyes, but never dimmed the warmth in them. Since the divorce last spring, she'd managed to keep things afloat, but only just barely. James Wilson still wore his park ranger uniform with pride, though the past year had hollowed him. His work protecting Rocky Mountain National Park had been his refuge after leaving the family home. The irony wasn't lost on him. He could save countless strangers in the wilderness, but had failed to preserve what mattered most. Sheriff Parker had patrolled Pinecrest for 23 years. The loss of his deputy to a dog attack had left him with a rigid approach to strays, especially large ones. "Dangerous animals don't belong among people," he'd often declare at town meetings. Dr. Sarah Thompson had known Melissa since veterinary school. Her expertise with working dogs had earned her respect throughout Colorado. She recognized training when she saw it, even in the most broken animals. And then there was Agent Miller, who arrived in town the same day Ethan went missing, his government credentials opening doors while revealing nothing. The annual Autumn Harvest Festival transformed Pinecrest Town Square into a tapestry of orange and gold. Children darted between hay bales and pumpkin displays, while locals bartered homemade pies and crafts. For Ethan Wilson, this Saturday promised to be the highlight of a difficult year. "Can we get caramel apples?" Mom, please. Ethan tugged at Melissa's sleeve, pointing toward a stand where an elderly couple dipped bright red apples into bubbling caramel. Melissa smiled down at her son, grateful for these moments of normalcy. One apple, but you'll have to eat real food first. She tousled his hair, watching his eyes light up with uncomplicated joy. They spent the morning wandering through the festival, Ethan collecting maple leaves and acorns in the small canvas bag his father had given him during their last camping trip. Melissa found herself checking her phone less frequently than usual, allowing herself this rare day of undivided attention. Dr. Wilson. The voice belonged to Amy, a young volunteer from the animal shelter. I'm so sorry to interrupt your day off, but there's an emergency at the clinic. The shepherd mix that came in yesterday started seizing, and Dr. Thompson is out of town until tonight. Melissa felt her stomach sink. She glanced at Ethan, who was already sensing the familiar shift in his mother's attention. I have to go, sweetheart, she explained, kneeling to meet his eyes. Just for a little while. Mrs. Bennett from your class is right over there with Katie. Would it be okay if you stayed with them until I get back? Ethan's shoulders slumped, but he nodded with the resignation of a child accustomed to disappointment. Will you be back for the pie contest? I promise I'll try, Melissa said, already knowing such promises were dangerous. She walked him over to Linda Bennett, exchanged information, and left with one backward glance at her son's diminishing figure among the festival crowds. 30 minutes later, with the emergency stabilized at the clinic, Melissa texted Linda to check on Ethan. The response froze her blood. I thought he was with you. Katie said he went to find you 10 minutes ago. At the edge of the festival grounds, where the neatly trimmed town grass gave way to the wilder landscape beyond, Shadow watched from the shelter of pine trees. The German shepherd had established a cautious routine over the past 3 months since arriving in Pinecrest. He avoided people during daylight, scavenged from dumpsters behind the diner at night, and slept in a dry culvert near the creek. The noise and crowds of the festival had kept him further back than usual, but hunger had drawn him closer as the day progressed. He observed the humans with the calculated distance of a creature who had once trusted them completely, then learned better. Ethan had not intended to wander away. After 20 minutes with the Bennetts, watching Katie play with her friends while he stood awkwardly aside, he spotted a monarch butterfly with striking orange wings. It fluttered just beyond the last vendor tent, and Ethan, bored and feeling forgotten, decided to follow it for just a moment. The butterfly led him to another, then another, until the sounds of the festival dimmed behind him, fascinated by their delicate flight. Ethan continued walking, following the butterfly's migration path into the meadow that bordered the forest. Only when the butterfly disappeared into the canopy of trees did Ethan stop and look around. The festival was now just a distant hum of activity. Unfamiliar trees towered around him, their leaves creating shifting patterns of light on the ground. "Mom," he called out, his voice sounding small even to his own ears. No answer came but the rustling of leaves in the autumn breeze. Ethan turned to go back, but realized with growing panic that he wasn't sure which way back was anymore. Shadow's ears perked up at the sound of a child's voice. He remained motionless, watching as the small boy wandered further from the safety of the town. Something about the child's solitary presence triggered memories of a time when Shadow had purpose, when protecting was his mission. In the distance, thunder rumbled. The forecast had predicted an afternoon storm, and dark clouds were already gathering above the mountain peaks. The wind picked up, carrying the scent of approaching rain. Ethan began walking faster, then running, his direction random and panicked. The first heavy droplets of rain fell through the canopy. His breathing grew labored, the familiar tightness beginning in his chest. Reaching into his pocket for his inhaler, Ethan tripped over an exposed root and fell hard onto the forest floor. The inhaler skittered away into the underbrush. "Help!" he cried, tears mixing with raindrops on his face. "Somebody help me." Shadow watched the boys fall from 50 yards away. He remained still, conflicted by competing instincts to stay hidden, to survive, to avoid humans who had caused him nothing but pain since his handler's death. But as the child's breathing became more distressed, something deeper and older than his trauma stirred within him. In his mind, Shadow was back in Afghanistan, following his training. The handler's voice echoed in his memory. "Find them, Shadow. Bring them home." The rain intensified, drenching Ethan as he crawled frantically, searching for his inhaler. His wheezing grew worse, panic constricting his airways further. Through blurred vision, he suddenly saw a large shape approaching a dog, massive and one-eyed, moving toward him with deliberate steps. Ethan froze, terror compounding his breathing difficulties. The German shepherd stopped several feet away, its amber eyes studying him with an intelligence that seemed almost human. Then, nose to ground, the dog began methodically quartering the area where Ethan had fallen. Within moments, Shadow found the inhaler. He picked it up gently between his teeth and approached the boy, dropping it within reach. Ethan stared in disbelief before grabbing the inhaler and taking 2 desperate puffs. As his breathing eased, the storm unleashed its full fury. Lightning flashed overhead, followed immediately by a deafening crack of thunder. The sudden noise spooked Shadow, who retreated several steps but didn't flee. Ethan, still frightened but desperate for any company, curled into himself beneath the inadequate shelter of a pine tree. The temperature dropped with the storm's intensity. Ethan's light festival clothing offered little protection against the elements. His teeth began to chatter, his small body shivering uncontrollably. Shadow watched, hesitating at the edge of a decision. Then, as another thunderclap boomed overhead, he made his choice. He approached the boy and lay down beside him, pressing his warm body against Ethan's trembling form. Ethan stiffened at first, then gradually relaxed against the dog's surprising warmth. "Good dog," he whispered through chattering teeth. Shadow shifted closer, allowing more of his body heat to transfer to the child. As the storm raged around them, man's best friend and a lost boy formed an alliance as old as humanity itself. Melissa Wilson stood in the middle of the festival grounds, rain pelting her face as she screamed her son's name into the worsening storm. The once cheerful autumn celebration had transformed into a nightmare of emergency vehicles, flashing lights, and grim-faced volunteers forming search lines. "When did you last see him exactly?" Sheriff Parker asked, his notepad already soaked despite his efforts to shield it under his jacket. "I told you, around noon, Linda Bennett was watching him while I handled an emergency at the clinic. Melissa's voice cracked. He's been missing for over 3 hours now. The sheriff nodded, speaking into his radio to coordinate the expanding search. The festival had been evacuated as the storm intensified, leaving behind a ghost town of abandoned booths and scattered autumn decorations. A park ranger truck skidded to a halt at the edge of the search area, and James Wilson leaped out before the vehicle had fully stopped. His face was ashen as he ran toward his ex-wife. "Melissa, what happened? Where's Ethan?" His ranger uniform was still dusty from trail work, his eyes wild with fear. "He wandered off from the festival," she said, the words catching in her throat. "James, he doesn't have his emergency inhaler. I found it in my purse. He must have forgotten to take it this morning." James closed his eyes briefly, absorbing this new terror. "He has his regular one, though, right?" "Yes, but in this weather, with his asthma—" She couldn't finish the sentence. James placed his hands on her shoulders, summoning the professional calm that had saved countless lost hikers over the years. "We'll find him, Melissa. I know these woods better than anyone." Their moment was interrupted by Sheriff Parker. "We've got the tracking dogs coming in from county. Should be here in 20 minutes. In the meantime, I've got teams moving outward in a standard search pattern." "I'm going with them," James stated, already checking his gear. "So am I," Melissa added, daring either man to object. Miles away, deep in the increasingly dark forest, Shadow had made a decision that went against years of learned caution. The small boy's condition was deteriorating rapidly. His breathing had stabilized thanks to the inhaler, but the cold and rain had soaked through his clothes, putting him at risk of hypothermia. Shadow had tried guiding Ethan back toward town, nudging him gently in what he sensed was the right direction, but the boy's strength had failed after less than a mile. Now, as darkness fell, Shadow recognized they wouldn't make it back before nightfall. The German shepherd scanned their surroundings, his military training surfacing in methodical assessment. They needed shelter. He gently tugged at Ethan's sleeve, guiding him toward a small hollow beneath a fallen oak. The space beneath was relatively dry, sheltered from the direct rainfall by the massive trunk and root system. "Are we going to sleep here?" Ethan asked, his voice small and frightened as Shadow nudged him into the hollow. The dog responded by pressing closer, sharing his body heat. Ethan's small hands clutched at Shadow's damp fur, finding comfort in the solid presence. "I wish you could talk," Ethan whispered. "I'd ask your name." Shadow kept his one good eye facing outward, scanning the growing darkness for threats. His ears rotated constantly, filtering the sounds of the forest. Something moved in the underbrush nearby, too large for a rabbit, too deliberate for deer. Shadow's muscles tensed, a low growl building in his throat. Ethan sensed the change. "What is it? Boy, is someone there?" Shadow rose slightly, positioning himself between the hollow's entrance and whatever lurked beyond. His growl deepened, a warning that transcended species. The rustling stopped, then retreated. Shadow remained vigilant for several more minutes before settling back down, though his body remained alert. As the night progressed, Ethan drifted in and out of consciousness, his small body shivering despite Shadow's warmth. The dog recognized the danger signs from his military training. Humans needed to stay warm and conscious. Whenever Ethan's eyes would flutter closed for too long, Shadow would gently lick his face or nudge him awake. The long night wore on, with Shadow standing guard against both the elements and forest predators drawn by the scent of vulnerability. Back in Pinecrest, the search center established in the town hall buzzed with grim activity. Maps were spread across tables, areas marked off in grids as search teams reported in. Melissa sat clutching Ethan's spare inhaler, refusing offers of coffee or blankets. James coordinated with fellow rangers, using his knowledge of the terrain to direct efforts toward likely areas. "He's 5 years old," he reminded the teams. "He wouldn't have made it more than a few miles, even before the storm hit." Sheriff Parker approached with a man none of them recognized, tall, clean-cut, wearing a dark jacket with government insignia. "This is Agent Miller from the Department of Agriculture." The sheriff introduced. "Wildlife Division. He's offered resources to help with the search." James studied the newcomer with immediate suspicion. "Wildlife Division for a missing child. We have infrared equipment that might be useful." Miller explained smoothly. "And I was already in the area tracking reports of a dangerous predator." "What kind of predator?" Melissa asked, suddenly alert. Miller hesitated. "Possibly a wolf, though some descriptions match a large dog. There have been livestock attacks in neighboring counties." James frowned. "There haven't been wolves in this part of Colorado for decades." "Hence my interest," Miller replied, his smile not reaching his eyes. "Now, about those search quadrants." As they leaned over the maps, James noticed something odd. Miller seemed more interested in the northwestern sections of the forest, areas James knew were unlikely for a child to reach. "Why focus there?" James questioned. "That's rocky terrain with steep elevation changes. Ethan would have stayed on easier ground." "Just being thorough," Miller responded. "Sometimes children wander farther than we expect." A volunteer burst into the room, interrupting their discussion. "The county K-9 unit is here. Outside, handlers unloaded 3 search dogs, a bloodhound, a German shepherd, and a Belgian Malinois." The handlers approached with items of Ethan's clothing for scenting. As the bloodhound began working the festival perimeter where Ethan was last seen, James found himself studying the government agent. Something about Miller tugged at his memory, a face glimpsed perhaps during his own brief military service before becoming a ranger. The bloodhound picked up a trail leading toward the forest edge, exactly where James had predicted. Teams reorganized to follow the scent path, equipping themselves with powerful flashlights and emergency medical gear. "We're suspending the ground search until dawn," Sheriff Parker announced to the gathered volunteers. "The terrain is too dangerous in the dark. Only professional teams will continue overnight." Melissa stood abruptly. "That's my son out there. You can't just—" "Mrs. Wilson?" Parker cut in firmly. "We have 3 professional K-9 teams, park rangers, and emergency personnel continuing the search. Sending untrained volunteers into those woods at night would only result in more missing persons." James placed a hand on Melissa's arm. "He's right. The professionals know what they're doing, and I'm going with them." "So am I," she insisted. "I'm a doctor. They might need me when we find him." After a brief argument, Parker relented, allowing both parents to join the professional search team heading into the forest. As they prepared to depart, Melissa noticed Miller speaking intently into a satellite phone, his back turned to the group. When he saw her watching, he quickly ended his call. "Everything okay?" she asked. "Just updating my superiors?" he replied. "Standard protocol." The search teams moved into the darkened forest, powerful lights cutting through the rain. The bloodhound led them steadily along Ethan's trail, which meandered in the confused pattern typical of a lost child. Miles ahead, Shadow remained vigilant through the long night. Twice he had to warn off curious predators with deep, threatening growls. His own strength was fading, he hadn't eaten in 2 days, and his old injuries ached in the cold dampness. Yet still he remained pressed against the small boy, transferring what warmth he could, staying awake while Ethan slept fitfully. As the first hint of dawn lightened the eastern sky, Shadow's sensitive ears picked up distant sounds, human voices, the bark of dogs. His military training recognized the systematic pattern of a search operation. Help was coming, but Shadow's instincts were conflicted. Humans meant danger as well as aid. His experiences since losing his handler had taught him harsh lessons about human cruelty. Yet the boy needed medical attention soon. Shadow made his decision. Rising stiffly, he gently nudged Ethan awake. The boy's face was pale, his lips tinged with blue despite the shelter. "Is it morning?" Ethan whispered hoarsely. Shadow looked toward the sounds of the approaching search team, then back at Ethan. The boy was too weak to walk far. With gentle teeth, Shadow tugged at Ethan's collar, urging him to climb onto his back. Understanding dawned in the boy's eyes. With trembling arms, he pulled himself onto the shepherd's broad back, clinging to the thick fur of his neck. Shadow carried his precious cargo slowly up the nearest rise, heading toward the sounds of rescue, every step a testament to a loyalty that transcended his own pain and fear. The morning light filtered weakly through the lingering storm clouds as the search teams pushed deeper into the forest. Melissa's boots squelched in the mud, her eyes burning from exhaustion and dried tears. She hadn't slept in nearly 24 hours, but adrenaline and maternal fear kept her moving forward. "The dogs have something," called one of the handlers, as the bloodhound suddenly strained at its leash, nose pressed firmly to the ground. "The scent is stronger here." James rushed forward, hope briefly illuminating his haggard features. 15 years as a park ranger had taught him to read the forest, but today he felt blind, desperate. This was not an anonymous hiker lost on a trail. This was Ethan, his son, his heart walking outside his body. "The tracks indicate he was moving more slowly here," James said, kneeling to examine a small footprint preserved in a patch of mud. "He was getting tired." "Or his asthma was acting up," Melissa added, her medical mind cataloging all the dangers her son faced: asthma attack, hypothermia, dehydration, wildlife. Behind them, Agent Miller studied the area with an intensity that seemed out of place for a wildlife officer. His eyes scanned the surroundings methodically, occasionally checking a small device that he quickly pocketed whenever others looked his way. "Unusual tracks here," he commented, pointing to some indentations near Ethan's footprints. "Could be canine." Sheriff Parker frowned. "A wolf following the boy, or a large dog," Miller replied. "Either way, not a good sign." Melissa felt her stomach lurch at the implication. James, however, looked closer at the tracks. "These aren't predatory movements," he said. his experience with wildlife evident. See how they parallel the boy's path, not directly behind if it was stalking him. The tracks would show a different pattern. Miller's expression remained neutral. Perhaps it was being cautious. Miles ahead, Shadow struggled with his precious burden. Though Ethan weighed only about 40 pounds, Shadow's own condition made carrying the boy increasingly difficult. Years of neglect and injury had weakened the once powerful military dog. Still, with each painful step, Shadow recalled his training mission first, no matter the personal cost. Ethan drifted in and out of consciousness, his small arms loosely wrapped around Shadow's neck. "You're a good dog," he whispered when awake. "Like in my storybooks." Shadow's ears constantly monitored their surroundings, cataloging each sound. When he caught the distant bark of search dogs, he changed direction slightly, moving toward the sound despite his instinct to avoid other canines. The shepherd's past came to him in fragments as he walked. He remembered the heat and dust of Afghanistan, the weight of tactical gear on his back, the hand signals from his handler, Staff Sergeant Michael Reeves. He remembered the explosion, the chaos, the strange men who took him when he was separated from his injured handler. He remembered the fighting pits, the forced battles with other dogs. The hunger used to make him aggressive. And he remembered his escape, running for days until he collapsed. Then the months of wandering, avoiding humans, scrounging for survival. The injury to his eye had come during his captivity, a result of refusing to fight another dog. His captors had punished him severely, but couldn't break the core of his training protect. Never harm the innocent. Shadow didn't understand how he had ended up in Colorado, so far from the deserts where he had served. He only knew that the small human on his back needed him now. And that was enough. Back in town. Dr. Sarah Thompson worked through the night at the veterinary clinic, catching snippets of news about the search between emergency cases. When a brief lull came around dawn, she decided to check the county records for reports of stray dogs in the area. Melissa had mentioned Agent Miller's concerns about a potentially dangerous canine, and Sarah wanted to be prepared if they brought in an injured animal. What she found gave her pause. There had been several sightings of a one-eyed German shepherd over the past few months, but no reports of aggression or livestock predation. In fact, one farmer reported that the dog had chased off coyotes threatening his chickens, then disappeared before he could approach it. Sarah's research took her deeper, to a veterinary database that tracked military working dogs. A nagging hunch made her search for German shepherds reported missing or lost in action. The database contained dozens, but one report caught her attention, a highly trained multi-purpose canine MPC from a Special Forces unit, missing and presumed dead after an operation 3 years ago. The dog's name was Shadow, a male German shepherd with distinctive amber eyes. The report included a photograph showing a powerful, alert dog with both eyes intact, standing proudly beside a smiling soldier in desert camouflage. Sarah picked up her phone to call Melissa, then hesitated. It was a long shot, and she had no proof that the stray in their area had any connection to the missing military dog. The last thing the search effort needed was a wild goose chase. Still, she sent a text. "Call me when you can. Might have info about the dog sightings." The morning search continued, with teams spreading out according to standard search protocols. The dogs worked hard, but the previous night's rain had washed away much of Ethan's scent. Progress slowed as the terrain became more challenging. "We should split up," Agent Miller suggested. "Cover more ground." Sheriff Parker nodded in agreement. "Miller, take 2 deputies and head northwest. The rest of us will continue following the K-9 team's lead." James exchanged a look with Melissa. Neither of them trusted the agent, though they couldn't articulate why. "I'm staying with the main group," James stated firmly. Miller shrugged. "Suit yourself." He selected 2 deputies and headed off in a direction that still struck James as an unlikely path for a lost child. As the morning wore on, Ethan's condition deteriorated. Shadow could feel the boy's grip weakening, his small body shivering uncontrollably despite the rising temperature. The dog pushed himself harder, ignoring the pain in his aging joints and the hunger gnawing at his belly. They reached a small clearing where sunlight broke through the clouds. Shadow gently lowered himself, allowing Ethan to slide off his back onto a patch of dry ground in the sunlight. The boy curled into a ball, his breathing labored. Shadow nudged the inhaler still clutched in Ethan's hand. The boy's eyes fluttered open, recognition dawning slowly. "Need this," he mumbled, raising the inhaler to his lips with trembling hands. The medication helped, but Ethan remained alarmingly weak. "I'm really tired," he told Shadow, his voice thin. "Mom says not to sleep when you're cold, but I can't stay awake." Shadow understood the danger. He positioned himself around the boy again, creating a warm shelter with his body. He needed to keep the child warm and awake until help arrived. With gentle persistence, he licked Ethan's face whenever the boy's eyes stayed closed too long. "You're like Sergeant," Ethan murmured. "Dad's friend's dog from the Army. He saved people, too." Shadow's ears perked up at the word sergeant, a title he associated with handlers. The boy continued talking, the words helping him stay awake. "Dad showed me pictures. He said military dogs are heroes. He said they never leave anyone behind." Ethan's small hand patted Shadow's side. "You're not leaving me behind either. Are you?" Shadow responded by pressing closer, his one eye fixed on the boy's face. No. He would not leave this child behind, no matter what approached wild animals, strange humans, or his own physical limitations. "I wish Mom and Dad were still together," Ethan confided, his voice dropping to a whisper. "Dad's always sad now. Mom works all the time. Nobody has time anymore." The simple pain in the child's voice stirred something protective in Shadow that went beyond training. He had witnessed the bond between parent and child before, had been charged with protecting such bonds during his service. The boy's loneliness resonated with Shadow's own isolation since losing his handler. Meanwhile, Melissa's phone buzzed with Sarah's text. Reception was spotty in the forest, but this message came through. She called the veterinarian when the search team paused for a brief rest. "What did you find?" she asked, stepping away from the group for privacy. Sarah explained her discovery about the missing military dog. "It's probably nothing, but the description matches the stray that's been seen around town. One eye, German Shepherd, unusual behavior." "Why would a military dog be in Pinecrest?" Melissa asked. "I don't know. The report says he went missing in Afghanistan 3 years ago, presumed dead after an operation went bad. But these dogs are incredible. There are stories of them finding their way home across incredible distances." Something clicked in Melissa's mind. "Wait, Agent Miller." He seemed very interested in the dog tracks we found. Too interested. Miller, the wildlife officer. He says he's from the Department of Agriculture. But James thinks he recognized him from somewhere else. Maybe military? The conversation gave Melissa an uneasy feeling that only intensified when she rejoined the search party. Miller and his team had not returned, and when she mentioned this to James, his expression darkened. "I don't like it," he said quietly. "Something's not right about him or his interest in this search." As midday approached, the main search team followed the bloodhound to the base of a small ridge. The dog became excited, pulling strongly at its leash. "He's got something," the handler called out. "Fresh scent." Hope surged through the exhausted searchers. James took the lead, his ranger training kicking in as he assessed the ridge. "If Ethan made it up there, he'd have better visibility," he said. "He's a smart kid. He might have tried to get to high ground." The team began the ascent, moving as quickly as safety allowed. Melissa stayed close behind James, her heart pounding with equal parts hope and fear. At the top of the ridge, Shadow heard the approaching searchers. His body tensed, torn between the instinct to flee and his obligation to the boy. He had avoided humans for so long that the thought of confronting them sent panic through his tired body. Yet Ethan needed help beyond what Shadow could provide. The shepherd made his decision. Gently nudging Ethan, he helped the boy sit up, positioning him to be visible from below. Then Shadow stood guard beside him, his posture alert despite his exhaustion. "Are they coming?" Ethan asked, hope flickering in his tired eyes. Shadow's ears tilted forward in confirmation. The boy managed a weak smile, patting the dog's side with a trembling hand. "Don't be scared," Ethan whispered. "They're good people. My mom and dad will like you." The dog remained unconvinced but committed to his chosen course. He would protect this child until proper care arrived, then slip away as he always had. James was the first to crest the ridge, his ranger training giving him an edge over the others. He scanned the clearing ahead, then froze, his hand automatically reaching for the sidearm he wasn't carrying. There, in a patch of sunlight, sat his son, pale, disheveled, but alive and beside him. A massive German shepherd with one eye, standing in a protective stance that James recognized from his military days. "Ethan?" he breathed, then louder. "Ethan!" The boy looked up, his face brightening. "Dad, Dad, I found a dog, or he found me." James approached slowly, his eyes never leaving the shepherd. The dog's posture was alert but not aggressive, a professional stance, evaluating the newcomer. "Easy," James said, using the calm voice he reserved for injured wildlife. "Easy, boy. I'm just here for my son." Shadow assessed the man, his scent, his body language, the way Ethan responded to him. The boy clearly recognized and welcomed this human. The dog remained tense, but allowed James to approach. Melissa appeared at the ridgetop next, followed closely by Sheriff Parker and the K-9 team. Her medical training and maternal instinct converged as she rushed toward her son, only to pull up short at the sight of the massive dog standing guard. "Oh my God," she whispered. "It's okay." "Mom," Ethan called, his voice stronger with excitement. "This is my dog. He saved me. He kept me warm and brought me up here so you could find me." Shadow watched the woman carefully. Her scent carried the same bass notes as the boy's family. She moved with the careful precision of someone who understood animals. Still, Shadow maintained his vigilant stance. "James," Melissa said quietly, her eyes on her son. "Is he—" "He's alive," James confirmed, his voice thick with emotion. "Thanks to this dog." Sheriff Parker and the search team maintained a respectful distance, aware of the delicate situation. The canine handlers kept their dogs back, recognizing that the shepherd might perceive them as threats. Melissa's medical instincts took over. "Ethan, honey, are you hurt anywhere? Can you breathe okay?" "I'm just cold and tired, Mom. My asthma got bad, but I used my inhaler, and Shadow kept me warm." "Shadow?" James asked. "That's what I named him." Ethan explained. "Because he followed me like a shadow at first." James and Melissa exchanged a look of surprise at the coincidence the boy had inadvertently given the dog its actual name. Shadow remained alert as the humans conversed, his one eye tracking each movement. He had completed his mission. The boy was safe, reunited with his pack. Now came the part where Shadow would traditionally fade away, return to the shadows of his solitary existence. But as he shifted his weight to back away, Ethan's small hand grasped his fur. "Don't go," the boy pleaded, somehow sensing the dog's intention. "Please don't leave." Something in the child's voice, in the simple trust of his touch, held Shadow in place. It had been so long since anyone had asked him to stay. The medical team arrived with a stretcher, and Ethan was gently examined. His condition was concerning mild hypothermia, exhaustion, and early signs of pneumonia, but not immediately life-threatening, thanks to Shadow's protection through the night. As they prepared to transport Ethan down the ridge, the boy refused to release his grip on Shadow's fur. "He has to come, too," he insisted with surprising strength. "He's hurt and hungry. He needs help, too." James studied the shepherd more carefully, noting the signs of malnourishment and old injuries. The dog's stance, even in exhaustion, spoke of formal training and intelligence far beyond an ordinary stray. Sarah's information about the missing military dog seemed increasingly plausible. "We'll bring him," James assured his son. "He saved your life, buddy. We won't leave him behind." Shadow hesitated, still wary of the humans surrounding them. But as the medical team lifted Ethan onto the stretcher, the boy's distress at their separation was evident. The shepherd made another choice, following closely as they began the careful descent from the ridge. No one noticed Agent Miller and his team watching from a distance, or the way Miller's hand tightened around his satellite phone as he observed the dog accompanying the rescue party. "Target acquired," he murmured into the device. "Proceeding with extraction plan." As they carried Ethan through the forest toward the waiting ambulance, Shadow never left the boy's side. Despite his own exhaustion and injuries, the shepherd maintained his protective vigilance, a silent guardian returning from the wilderness. The news of Ethan's rescue spread quickly through Pinecrest. By the time the search party reached the forest edge, a crowd of volunteers and community members had gathered. Cheers erupted at the sight of the stretcher bearing the boy, followed by murmurs of surprise at the one-eyed shepherd, walking steadily alongside. Dr. Sarah Thompson waited with her veterinary emergency vehicle, alerted by Melissa that they were bringing in an injured dog as well as Ethan. when she caught sight of Shadow. Her suspicions were confirmed. This was indeed a military-grade working dog, and his bearing suggested specialized training beyond standard K9 units. As Ethan was loaded into the ambulance, he reached out once more for Shadow. "He's coming to the hospital, too, right?" he asked anxiously. The paramedics exchanged uncomfortable glances. "Son, we can't bring a dog in the ambulance," one explained gently. Ethan's face crumpled. "But he saved me. He's hurt too." Shadow stood still, watching the interaction, somehow understanding the conflict. He had completed his mission. The boy was in proper care now. It was time for Shadow to disappear again, to return to the margins where he'd learned to survive before he could retreat. However, Melissa knelt beside him, with the careful movements of someone accustomed to handling injured animals. She examined him visually, noting his condition. "Dr. Thompson will take good care of him, Ethan," she promised. "And when you're both better, we'll figure everything out. I promise." The boy reluctantly accepted this, allowing the paramedics to close the ambulance doors. As the vehicle pulled away, Shadow watched it go, something shifting in his canine understanding of the world. For the first time since losing his handler, he had connected with humans again, had fulfilled his purpose. "Come on, boy," Sarah said gently, opening the back of her veterinary transport. "Let's get you checked out." Shadow hesitated, then limped toward the vehicle. His mission had changed, evolved. The boy was safe, but something told Shadow their paths would cross again. For now, he would accept help, a concession his desperate survival had not allowed for years. As Sarah's vehicle followed the ambulance toward town, James and Sheriff Parker remained behind, watching Agent Miller's team emerge from the forest. "Successful rescue," Miller commented, his tone casual. "Lucky the boy had that dog with him." "Lucky indeed," James agreed, studying the agent's face. "Though I'm curious why a wildlife officer is so interested in a stray dog." Miller's expression revealed nothing. "Rabies concerns, standard protocol." But James had served long enough to recognize a cover story. Whatever Miller's true interest in Shadow, James was certain of one thing: the shepherd had saved Ethan's life, and James would ensure the dog received the same loyalty in return. As the impromptu rescue caravan headed back to Pinecrest, Shadow rested his head on his paws in the veterinary transport. For the first time in years, he allowed himself to close his eye completely, surrendering to exhaustion. The boy was safe. The mission was complete. And perhaps, just perhaps, Shadow had found something he thought lost forever: a purpose and a home. Pinecrest Community Hospital bustled with activity as news of Ethan's rescue spread throughout the small town. Doctors and nurses moved efficiently around the boy, connecting monitors, administering medication, and checking his vital signs. Through it all, Ethan kept asking the same question: "Where's Shadow? Is he okay?" Melissa stayed by her son's side, her medical knowledge both a blessing and a curse, as she understood exactly how close they had come to losing him. Hypothermia, dehydration, early pneumonia, and asthma complications, a deadly combination that would have claimed her son if not for the one-eyed shepherd. "Shadow is with Dr. Thompson," she assured Ethan for the 5th time. "She's the best veterinarian in Colorado. She'll take good care of him." "Doctor," Harrison, the pediatrician, pulled Melissa aside after completing his examination. "He's going to be fine," he said quietly. "Another few hours out there. Though—" He left the sentence unfinished, but the implication was clear. "The dog saved his life," Melissa said, her voice catching. "If Shadow hadn't kept him warm through the night." Across town at Pinecrest Animal Clinic, Dr. Sarah Thompson worked methodically to assess Shadow's condition. The German Shepherd remained alert despite his exhaustion, his amber eye tracking her every movement. He allowed the examination but maintained a professional distance, not aggressive, but not surrendering either. "You're quite something, aren't you?" Sarah murmured as she gently palpated his rib cage, noting the prominence of bones beneath his dull coat. "Military working dog, for sure. But how did you end up here in Pinecrest?" Shadow's physical condition told a story of prolonged neglect and hardship. Severely underweight, with multiple old injuries that had healed poorly without medical attention. The empty eye socket showed signs of infection that had fortunately resolved, though the scarring was extensive. Most telling were the marks around his neck and legs, evidence of restraints and, Sarah suspected with growing anger, fighting chains. "Someone used you for dog fighting," she said grimly. "After all your service." Despite his condition, Shadow's behavior revealed his training. He sat perfectly still for injections, followed basic commands without hesitation, and demonstrated the focused intelligence characteristic of elite working dogs. Sarah had just drawn blood for testing when James Wilson arrived at the clinic, still in his mud-covered ranger uniform. "How is he?" James asked, approaching Shadow with respectful caution. "Malnourished, dehydrated, old injuries, but nothing immediately life-threatening," Sarah replied. "He's one tough dog. How's Ethan?" "He'll recover. The doctors are keeping him for observation, but—" James shook his head, emotion overwhelming him momentarily. "If this dog hadn't found him, hadn't kept him warm through the night—" Shadow watched the man, assessing. Something about James's bearing reminded him of handlers he had known, the quiet confidence, the direct gaze. When James slowly extended his hand, palm up, Shadow sniffed it cautiously. "I think he likes you," Sarah observed. "I served with canine units in Afghanistan," James explained. "Never had a dog of my own, but I worked alongside them." He studied Shadow more carefully. "Have you confirmed he's military?" Sarah nodded. "I found him in the database. Shadow, multi-purpose canine with special forces. Reported missing in action 3 years ago during an operation in Kandahar province. His handler, Staff Sergeant Michael Reeves, was killed in the same operation." James let out a low whistle. "MPC training. That's the elite of the elite. These dogs are worth 6 figures, with capabilities most civilian canines can't touch." He knelt to Shadow's level. "How did you end up in Pinecrest, boy?" Shadow's ear twitched at the respectful tone, but he maintained his dignified reserve. Their conversation was interrupted by the arrival of Sheriff Parker and, more troublingly, Agent Miller. The agent's eyes fixed immediately on Shadow, his expression unreadable. "I'll need to quarantine that dog," Miller announced without preamble. "Potential rabies case." Sarah stepped protectively between Miller and Shadow. "That's ridiculous." This dog shows absolutely no signs of rabies. In fact, he's a military working dog, fully documented. Miller's expression flickered briefly. Military, I was told it was a stray. He is now, James interjected. But he was reported MIA 3 years ago in Afghanistan. His chip confirms it. All the more reason to quarantine him, Miller insisted. He could be carrying foreign pathogens. Department of Agriculture protocol is clear. Any animal with unknown history requires. He saved my son's life. James interrupted, his voice hardening. And I'm not convinced you're actually with the Department of Agriculture. Sheriff Parker shifted uncomfortably. His credentials checked out. James. Did they? James challenged. Because I've been making some calls. The Wildlife Division doesn't send agents to investigate stray dogs, even potentially dangerous ones. That would be Animal Control's jurisdiction. Miller's hand moved subtly toward his jacket. I don't appreciate the implication. Ranger Wilson. And I don't appreciate being lied to while my son was missing, James replied evenly. Who are you, really? Miller. And what's your interest in this particular dog? The tension in the room escalated as Miller and James faced off. Shadow, sensing the confrontation, rose to his feet, his posture alert but not aggressive. Sarah placed a gentle hand on the shepherd's back, both restraining and reassuring. This is absurd, Miller finally said. Sheriff, I'm invoking federal authority to take custody of this animal. It's a matter of public safety. Sheriff Parker looked uncertain. I'll need to see the specific authorization for that. You've seen my credentials? Miller snapped. General credentials. Yes, the sheriff replied. But not specific authorization to seize animals. That would require documentation I haven't seen. As the argument continued, the clinic door opened, and Melissa Wilson entered, her face showing the strain of recent events. James, she called, ignoring the others. Ethan's asking for Shadow. He's getting agitated, and the doctors are concerned about his breathing. James turned to her. How bad? Bad enough that they're considering sedation, which they'd rather avoid with his respiratory issues. Sarah exchanged a look with James. Bringing a dog into the pediatric ward isn't standard protocol. Neither is a former military dog saving a child from certain death in the wilderness. James replied. He turned to Miller. Whatever your agenda is, it can wait. This dog just saved my son's life, and now my son needs him. Absolutely not, Miller said firmly. That dog is coming with me. The standoff might have continued indefinitely if not for the arrival of an unexpected ally. The clinic door opened again, admitting a tall, broad-shouldered man in an army dress uniform adorned with the insignia of a full colonel. I believe there's some confusion about jurisdiction here, the newcomer stated, his authoritative voice filling the room. Miller turned, his composure slipping visibly. Colonel Weber, I wasn't informed you were in the area. Evidently, the colonel replied dryly. He nodded to the others. Colonel David Weber, United States Army. I apologize for the intrusion, but when I heard a missing MPC had been recovered in Colorado, I felt personal attention was warranted. Shadow's reaction to the colonel was immediate and surprising. The shepherd's posture shifted from alert wariness to recognition, his tail giving a single tentative wag. Weber smiled slightly. Hello, Shadow. It's been a long time. James looked between them. You know this dog? I authorized his training program, Weber explained. Shadow was one of our most successful MPCs. His disappearance was problematic. Miller cleared his throat. Colonel, with all due respect, my orders. Your orders, Weber interrupted coldly, were to locate and identify the animal, then report back, not to seize it without authorization. The revelation hung in the air. Miller was not, it seemed, who he claimed to be. He's private military, Weber explained to the others. Contractor. His company had certain arrangements with units overseas. When evidence suggested one of our missing assets might have surfaced in Colorado, they sent Miller to investigate. Asset, Melissa repeated incredulously. He's a dog, not equipment. To the U.S. military, he's both, Weber acknowledged. A highly trained, extremely valuable service animal who deserves our respect and proper care. He turned back to Miller. Your services are no longer required here. Report back to your superiors that I've taken personal charge of this situation. Miller's face darkened, but he recognized defeat. With a curt nod, he departed, leaving an uncomfortable silence in his wake. Weber turned to Sarah. Doctor, what's Shadow's medical status? Sarah hesitated, looking to James and Melissa. He's stable, but underweight and exhausted. He needs rest, proper nutrition, and follow-up care for some old injuries. And my son needs him, Melissa added firmly. Ethan is asking for Shadow. The dog saved his life. Weber considered this. Military working dogs sometimes form strong bonds with those they rescue. It's not unprecedented. He studied Shadow thoughtfully. I came here expecting to arrange transport back to our training facility. But perhaps there's a better solution. Sir, James began, I don't pretend to understand all the politics at play here. But I know that dog is the reason my son is alive. Whatever his official status, he's earned the right to choose his own path now. The colonel smiled slightly. You have some experience with military working dogs. Ranger Wilson. 2 tours in Afghanistan before I joined the Park Service. I worked alongside K-9 units. Weber nodded. Then you understand their value. He knelt before Shadow, who held his gaze steadily. This dog completed his final mission on his own terms. Perhaps retirement is in order. The word retirement lightened the atmosphere instantly. In military K-9 circles, retirement meant a chance for a normal life, usually with a handler or adoptive family. You mean we could keep him? Melissa asked, hope evident in her voice. For Ethan. There would be paperwork, Weber cautioned, and certain conditions. Shadow's training makes him special. But yes, adoption could be arranged. The conversation was interrupted by Sarah's phone ringing. She answered, listened briefly, then looked at Melissa with concern. That was the hospital. Ethan's oxygen levels are dropping. He's asking for Shadow and becoming increasingly distressed. Melissa looked desperately at Weber. Please, my son needs him now. The colonel made a quick decision. Doctor, is Shadow stable enough to be moved? Sarah nodded. Yes, but then let's go. Weber said. "I'll handle hospital administration." Minutes later, an unusual procession entered Pinecrest Community Hospital. James and Melissa, followed by Sarah leading Shadow on a makeshift leash, with Colonel Weber in full-dress uniform bringing up the rear. Hospital staff stared in disbelief but offered no resistance as Weber flashed his military ID. Outside Ethan's room, Dr. Harrison met them with a skeptical expression. "Mrs. Wilson, you can't seriously be suggesting—" "This isn't a suggestion," Weber interrupted smoothly. "This is a registered military therapy animal making an emergency intervention." He handed the doctor a business card. "Any questions can be directed to this number at the Pentagon." The doctor looked at the card, then at the determined faces surrounding him, and finally at Shadow, who sat at perfect attention despite his evident exhaustion. 5 minutes, Dr. Harrison conceded, and at the first sign of distress, "We'll remove him immediately," Sarah promised. Sarah. They entered Ethan's room to find the boy pale and frightened, an oxygen mask covering his small face. His eyes widened at the sight of Shadow, and he immediately tried to sit up. "Easy, sweetheart," Melissa cautioned, moving to his side. "Shadow's here to visit, but you need to stay calm and keep your mask on." Shadow approached the hospital bed cautiously, his training evident in his gentle movements. He sniffed Ethan's outstretched hand, then, in a gesture that brought tears to every adult's eyes, gently rested his head on the edge of the bed. Ethan's monitors, which had been showing elevated heart rate and concerning oxygen levels, began to stabilize almost immediately. The boy placed a trembling hand on Shadow's head, and the dog remained perfectly still, allowing the touch. "I told you he was a good dog," Ethan whispered from behind his mask. "He saved me." "Yes, he did," James agreed, moving to stand beside Melissa. "And we're going to help him now." Harrison watched the monitors with undisguised amazement. "His numbers are improving," he admitted quietly to Sarah. "I've seen therapy dogs work before, but nothing this immediate." "He's not just any therapy dog," Sarah replied. "They've bonded." The 5-minute limit came and went, with Dr. Harrison making no move to enforce it, as Ethan's condition continued to improve. Shadow remained vigilant beside the bed, his one eye rarely leaving the boy's face. Colonel Weber observed with professional interest. "The bond goes both ways," he noted. "Shadow is displaying protective behavior, but also seeking comfort from the boy. It's unusual for an MPC to attach so quickly to a civilian." "Maybe they both needed saving," Melissa suggested softly. The emotional moment was interrupted by a commotion in the hallway. Agent Miller had returned, this time with 2 uniformed men and what appeared to be legal documents. "Colonel Weber," Miller called from the doorway. "I have extraction orders signed by General Ramsey himself. The asset is to be transported immediately to secure facilities for evaluation." Weber's expression hardened. "Show me those orders." As Miller handed over the papers, Shadow's posture changed subtly. A low growl rumbled in his chest, his eye fixed on the agent. Ethan's small hand tightened in the dog's fur. "Don't let them take him," the boy pleaded, his voice triggering a warning beep from the oxygen monitor. James moved protectively between the doorway and the bed. "This needs to happen elsewhere. Not in my son's hospital room." Weber scanned the documents quickly, his frown deepening. These orders are for asset recovery in a compromised scenario. There is no compromise here. Agent Miller, Shadow is secure and receiving appropriate care. With all due respect, Colonel, that determination isn't yours to make. General Ramsey reports to the same chain of command I do, Weber interrupted. And I'm physically present to assess the situation while he's relying on your reports. He handed the papers back. I'm countermanding these orders pending further review. Shadow remains here until proper veterinary clearance is given. Miller's face flushed with anger. You don't have that authority. I absolutely do, Weber replied calmly. And I'll remind you that interfering with a military working dog is a federal offense, one that your contractor status doesn't protect you from. The standoff lasted several tense seconds before Miller backed down. This isn't over, he warned, before retreating with his men. As soon as they left, Ethan's monitors showed elevated stress again. Shadow responded immediately, pressing closer to the boy, offering comfort. I won't let them take him, Ethan declared with surprising strength. He's my dog now. James and Melissa exchanged looks over their son's head. The determination in his voice was familiar to both of them, the Wilsons' stubbornness that they'd each recognized in each other during their marriage, and now saw reflected in their son. We'll figure something out, James promised, placing a hand on Shadow's back. The dog accepted his touch without moving away from Ethan. Colonel Weber watched the interaction thoughtfully. There may be a solution that satisfies all parties, he said, but it will require some negotiation and a demonstration of Shadow's current capabilities. What kind of demonstration? Melissa asked warily. Nothing strenuous, Weber assured her. Just proof that Shadow is still the dog I remember, disciplined, controlled, and capable of following commands. If he passes, I can recommend official retirement and adoption placement. Dr. Harrison cleared his throat. Whatever you're planning needs to wait. Ethan requires rest. And frankly, so does the dog. As if to emphasize the point, Shadow's head drooped slightly, his exhaustion finally overcoming his vigilance. Ethan noticed immediately. Shadow's tired, he announced with childish certainty. He needs to sleep here with me. Before any of the adults could object, the boy shifted over in his hospital bed, creating a small space. Shadow looked at the offered spot, then at Melissa and James, as if seeking permission. That's not exactly hospital protocol, Dr. T. Harrison began. Make an exception, James said quietly, for both their sakes. After a moment's hesitation, Melissa nodded her agreement. Shadow needed no further invitation. With the careful movements of an animal accustomed to working around humans, he climbed onto the bed and settled beside Ethan, his body forming a protective curve around the boy. Within minutes, both were asleep, the exhausted child and his one-eyed guardian, finding in each other the peace that had eluded them separately. As the adults moved into the hallway to continue their discussion, Colonel Weber glanced back at the sleeping pair. I've seen a lot of remarkable things in my military career, he said quietly. But that bond, that's something special. The road ahead would not be simple. Miller and his employers would not give up easily. And Shadow's mysterious journey from Afghanistan to Colorado contained secrets yet to be revealed. But for this moment, in the quiet hospital room, Two wounded souls had found healing in each other, the lost boy and the dog who had wandered out of the shadows to save him. The next 48 hours passed in a blur of medical updates, legal discussions, and emotional highs and lows. Ethan's condition improved steadily, with Shadow maintaining his self-appointed position as guardian. The hospital staff, initially skeptical about allowing a dog on the pediatric floor, gradually accepted Shadow's presence as they witnessed the remarkable bond between dog and child. Dr. Sarah Thompson visited twice daily to check on Shadow, bringing specialized food to help him regain strength. "He's severely malnourished," she explained to James and Melissa as they watched Shadow eat carefully measured portions. "We need to reintroduce proper nutrition slowly to avoid refeeding syndrome." Melissa noticed the shepherd never consumed his entire meal at once. Instead, he would eat half, then save the rest, as if uncertain when his next meal would come. The habit spoke volumes about his years of survival on his own. "How long do you think he was wandering?" she asked Sarah. "Based on his condition, at least a year, probably longer." Sarah gently examined Shadow's paw pads, which showed signs of extensive travel. "The real question is how he got from Afghanistan to Colorado. That's a journey that shouldn't be possible." Colonel Weber had been making calls, pulling together fragments of Shadow's missing history. On the morning of the third day, he requested a private meeting with James and Melissa in the hospital conference room. Shadow, unwilling to leave Ethan's side, remained in the boy's room under the watchful eye of a nurse who had become particularly fond of the shepherd. "I've managed to piece together parts of Shadow's story," Weber began, spreading several files on the table. "After the operation where his handler was killed, Shadow wasn't actually missing in action. He was stolen." "Stolen," James repeated. "By whom?" "A private military contractor called Cerberus Operations." Weber's expression darkened. "They've been on our radar for years. They specialize in, let's call it, asset acquisition, military equipment, weapons, and occasionally specially trained animals." "Like Shadow," Melissa said. Weber nodded. "MPCs like Shadow represent hundreds of thousands of dollars in training. Some contractors find it more efficient to steal a fully trained dog than to invest in training their own." "And Miller works for this Cerberus?" James asked. "He's their retrieval specialist," Weber confirmed. "Based on the records we've uncovered, Shadow was transported to a Cerberus facility in Texas after being taken from Afghanistan. He was there for approximately 6 months." "Doing what?" Melissa asked, though she feared she already knew the answer. Weber hesitated. "We believe they were attempting to retrain him for private security work. When that failed, they—" He paused, clearly disturbed by his own information. "There's evidence they tried to use him in organized dogfighting rings." "God," Melissa whispered, thinking of the scars they'd found on Shadow's body. "Shadow was a military working dog with the highest level of training," Weber continued. "He would have been conditioned never to attack without command, never to fight other dogs. They would have had to break him to make him fight." "But they couldn't," James guessed. "No." According to an informant, Shadow refused. Despite their methods, eventually, he was deemed uncooperative and was transferred to another facility. The trail goes cold for about a year after that. And then, Melissa prompted. "A dog matching Shadow's description was reported at an illegal fighting operation that was raided in New Mexico 18 months ago. In the chaos of the raid, several dogs escaped, We believe Shadow was among them. So he's been wandering all this time, James said, making his way north somehow. It appears so, Weber agreed. A remarkable journey by any standard. Military working dogs have been known to travel great distances to return to handlers or familiar locations. But Shadow's journey is exceptional. Their conversation was interrupted by a text message from the nurse watching Ethan. Shadow was becoming agitated, pacing and whining. "We should get back," Melissa said, already rising from her chair. They returned to find Dr. Harrison examining Ethan, whose breathing seemed more labored than earlier. Shadow stood at the foot of the bed, his posture tense, eye fixed on the doctor's every move. "His lung sounds are concerning," Dr. Harrison explained. "The pneumonia may be advancing despite the antibiotics. I'm ordering a chest X-ray and considering moving him to Denver Children's Hospital, where they have a pediatric pulmonologist." Ethan looked frightened, his small hand clutching Shadow's fur. "I don't want to go to Denver," he said, his voice thin. "Shadow can't come with me there." "Honey, if that's what you need," Melissa began. "No." Ethan's vehemence triggered a coughing fit that sent his oxygen levels plummeting. Alarm sounded as nurses rushed in, placing an oxygen mask over his face. Shadow's distress mirrored the boy's. The shepherd trembled visibly, his eye darting between Ethan and the medical staff. Dr. Harrison gave orders rapidly as the situation escalated. "We need to intubate," he announced grimly. "His lungs can't keep up." "Everyone out," the charge nurse ordered, "including the dog." James reached for Shadow's makeshift collar. But the shepherd resisted, planting himself firmly beside Ethan's bed. "Shadow, come," James commanded. Using the authoritative tone he'd observed worked best. To everyone's surprise, Shadow refused the direct command. Instead, he pressed closer to Ethan, who reached weakly for the dog despite the oxygen mask and the nurse's attempts to prepare him for intubation. "I've never seen him disobey a command," Weber said quietly from the doorway. "Not once in all his training." The medical team was losing patience. "That dog needs to go. Now," Dr. Harrison insisted. James made another attempt to lead Shadow away, speaking quietly in his ear. "You're not helping him by staying, boy. Let them work." Something in James's tone finally reached Shadow. With visible reluctance, the shepherd allowed himself to be led from the room, though he planted himself directly outside the door, his body tense and alert. The next hour was the longest of Melissa and James's lives. They sat side by side in the waiting area, united by their fear for their son. Shadow remained standing by Ethan's door, refusing food or water, his vigilance unwavering. Dr. Harrison finally emerged, his face grave. "We've stabilized him for now," he reported, "but his condition is deteriorating faster than we anticipated. The infection in his lungs is resistant to the antibiotics we're using." "What's the next step?" James asked, his ranger training kicking in focus on the actionable items, manage the crisis at hand. "We've called for an airlift to Denver Children's. They're sending a helicopter. It should be here within the hour." Melissa closed her eyes briefly, absorbing the news. "When can we see him?" "Now, but briefly. He's sedated and intubated. He won't be conscious." They followed Dr. Harrison back to Ethan's room, Shadow instantly falling in beside them, the sight of their son pale, intubated, surrounded by machines, hit them like a physical blow. The vibrant, curious boy who had chased butterflies at the festival was now still and silent, kept alive by medical technology. Shadow approached the bed cautiously, sniffing the air, clearly disturbed by the changes in Ethan's condition and scent. He whined softly, nosing at the boy's limp hand. "I'm sorry, boy," James said quietly. "He's very sick." The shepherd looked up at James, then at Melissa, before returning his gaze to Ethan. Something in his posture conveyed understanding and determination. Colonel Weber watched from the doorway. "I've made arrangements for Shadow's immediate veterinary care while you're in Denver," he said. "Dr. Thompson has offered to board him at her clinic until—" "No," Melissa interrupted, her eyes never leaving her son. "Shadow comes with us to Denver. Mrs. Wilson." "The medical helicopter won't," Dr. Harrison began. "Then we'll drive him there ourselves," she insisted. "Ethan needs him." The conviction in her voice silenced further objections. James nodded his agreement, placing a hand on Shadow's back. "We'll find a way." As they prepared for Ethan's transfer, a new complication arrived. Sheriff Parker appeared at the hospital, his expression apologetic but determined. "I'm sorry," he said to James and Melissa, "but I've been served with court papers demanding custody of the dog." He held up an official-looking document. "It's a federal order citing national security concerns. I have to take him." James stepped protectively in front of Shadow. "Our son is fighting for his life. This dog is helping him fight. Whoever wants Shadow can wait." Sheriff Parker looked genuinely pained. "I don't have a choice. James, it's a federal order." Colonel Weber examined the papers. "This is Miller's work," he said grimly. "He's gone over my head." He looked at his watch. "I need an hour to make some calls. Contest this. The helicopter will be here in 40 minutes. Dr. Harrison reminded them. As the adults argued, Shadow made his own decision. With one last look at Ethan's still form, he walked to the corner of the room and lay down, his head on his paws, his eye fixed on the boy. The gesture was clear. He would not leave willingly. Anyone who wanted to take him from Ethan would have to physically remove him, and Shadow's military training made that a daunting prospect. The standoff continued as Ethan's condition remained critical, and the clock ticked relentlessly toward his emergency transfer. Shadow's silent vigil embodied a loyalty that transcended human complications. A bond formed in the wilderness that neither legal documents nor medical protocols could sever. The sound of helicopter rotors thudded in the distance as tension in Ethan's hospital room reached its breaking point. Sheriff Parker stood uncomfortably by the door, the federal order clutched in his hand. Colonel Weber spoke urgently into his phone, his normally composed expression betraying frustration. James and Melissa remained beside their son's bed, with Shadow still in his self-appointed corner, watching everything with his one amber eye. "They're 5 minutes out," Dr. Harrison announced, entering the room with a team of transfer specialists. "We need to prepare Ethan now." The medical team moved efficiently around the bed, disconnecting monitors to switch to portable equipment, checking the ventilator settings, preparing Ethan for transport. Through it all, Shadow remained motionless, except for his eyes, which tracked every movement, every person who approached the boy. "Time's up," Sheriff Parker said reluctantly. "I need to take the dog now." James stepped forward, placing himself between the sheriff and Shadow. Parker, you've known me for 15 years. I'm asking you, as a friend and a father, don't do this. The sheriff's discomfort was evident. It's a federal order, James. I could lose my badge. Then I'll take your badge. The new voice came from the doorway, where a slender woman in her 60s stood with unmistakable authority. Mayor Eleanor Hampton had served Pinecrest for 4 consecutive terms. Her silver hair and stern demeanor, as much a town landmark as the century-old pine tree in the square. "Madam Mayor," Parker began, "this isn't a local matter. I've been served with. I know exactly what you've been served with." Mayor Hampton interrupted, stepping into the room. "And I know a legal overreach when I see one." She turned to Colonel Weber. "Colonel, I believe you're familiar with Senator Gardner." Weber straightened slightly. "The chairman of the Armed Services Committee?" "Yes, ma'am." "He's my brother-in-law," Hampton stated matter-of-factly. "We just had a fascinating conversation about military working dogs, federal jurisdiction, and a company called Cerberus Operations." She handed Weber a phone. "He'd like to speak with you directly." As Weber took the call, Dr. Sarah Thompson slipped into the already crowded room, moving quietly to Shadow's side. The shepherd acknowledged her with a slight tail movement, but remained vigilant. "I've brought something," Sarah whispered to Melissa, withdrawing a small device from her lab coat pocket. "It's a microchip scanner. If we can confirm Shadow's military ID on the spot, it might help." The mayor, meanwhile, had turned her attention to Sheriff Parker. "I'm declaring a temporary emergency jurisdiction over this animal as town property until federal authorities can sort themselves out. That dog saved a child of Pinecrest, and we take care of our own." "Ma'am, with all due respect, you don't have the authority to try me, Parker," the mayor cut in. "I've been preparing for the town council meeting when this came up. I have 37 years of municipal code memorized, and I guarantee I can find something that will stick long enough to let that helicopter take off." The standoff was interrupted by the arrival of the helicopter medical team. As they entered to take charge of Ethan's transfer, their professional focus momentarily faltered at the scene before them, the crowded room, the tense confrontation, and the one-eyed German shepherd maintaining his protective vigil. "What's going on here?" the lead flight medic asked. "We need to move now." Colonel Weber ended his call, his expression transformed from frustration to satisfaction. "Sheriff, I believe this will interest you." He handed Parker a message that had just arrived on his phone. "Direct from the Department of Defense, countermanding your federal order." Parker read it quickly, relief washing over his face. "This appears to be an order." "It is," Weber confirmed. "The Secretary of Defense has personally classified Shadow as essential to a sensitive ongoing operation. Any interference with the dog is now a matter of national security." He allowed himself a small smile. "Sometimes bureaucracy works in our favor." The flight medic cleared his throat impatiently. "That's all very interesting, but we have a critically ill child to transport. Are we bringing the dog or not?" Melissa looked at the medic pleadingly. "He keeps my son calm. Is there any way?" "Absolutely not," the medic stated firmly. "No animals in the medical helicopter. It's non-negotiable." James knelt beside Shadow, speaking quietly. "We'll follow by car. I promise we'll be right behind you." The shepherd's eye remained fixed on Ethan. unconvinced. As the medical team prepared to move Ethan's gurney, Dr. Harrison checked the boy's vitals one last time. "His oxygen levels are dropping again," he announced grimly. "We need to adjust the ventilator settings." In the momentary pause that followed, something extraordinary happened. Shadow rose from his corner and approached the bed. Before anyone could stop him, he placed his front paws carefully on the edge of the mattress and leaned forward, his nose nearly touching Ethan's face. The room fell silent as the shepherd sniffed the boy thoroughly, moving from his face to his chest. Then, with deliberate precision, Shadow began to paw at the right side of Ethan's chest, whining urgently. "Get him back!" "Doctor," Harrison ordered, moving to protect his patient. Sarah stepped forward quickly. "Wait. Military dogs are trained to detect changes in body chemistry. Some can sense medical events before they happen." The flight medic, who had worked with military units, nodded in agreement. "She's right. We had K9s in Afghanistan that could detect seizures before they occurred." Harrison hesitated, then made a quick decision. "Let me check that area specifically." He pressed his stethoscope to the exact spot Shadow had indicated, listening intently. His expression changed from skepticism to concern. "There's diminished breath sounds here, different from the rest of the lung field." The flight medic joined him, listening for himself. "Possible pneumothorax developing, or a pocket of infection." "We need a portable ultrasound. Now," Harrison ordered. A nurse rushed to comply. Within minutes, the doctor's suspicions were confirmed. "There's a loculated pocket of infection here that wasn't visible on the previous scans. It's putting pressure on the lung. We need to drain it before transport." As the medical team worked urgently to address the newly discovered complication, Melissa looked at Shadow with dawning realization. "He knew," she whispered. "He sensed something was wrong in that specific spot." The procedure was performed quickly, with a thin drainage tube inserted into Ethan's chest. Immediately, his oxygen levels began to improve. "If we hadn't caught this before the flight..." Dr. K. Harrison didn't need to finish the sentence. The implications were clear to everyone in the room. The flight medic studied Shadow with newfound respect. "That dog just potentially saved this kid's life. Again." He turned to his team. "Change of plan. The dog comes with us." "But the protocols..." one of the team began. "I'm making a field decision," the medic stated firmly. "That animal is functionally a medical device at this point. We need him with the patient." As the others stared in disbelief, he addressed Melissa and James. "One of you can accompany your son in the helicopter. The other will need to drive to Denver with the colonel and the vet." Melissa and James exchanged a look. "You go in the helicopter," James said. "I'll bring Shadow by car if they change their minds." The flight medic shook his head. "The dog comes in the helicopter. After what I just witnessed, I'm not separating them." And so, in an unprecedented deviation from standard protocol, Ethan Wilson was transported to Denver Children's Hospital accompanied by his mother and a one-eyed German shepherd who sat perfectly still throughout the 15-minute flight, his gaze never leaving the boy's face. James, Colonel Weber, Dr. Thompson, and Mayor Hampton followed by Carr, leaving Sheriff Parker behind to handle the increasingly frustrated Agent Miller, who arrived at the hospital just as the helicopter lifted off. "This isn't over," Miller declared, watching the aircraft disappear into the distance. "I believe it is," Mayor Hampton replied coolly. "You'll find Pinecrest takes care of its own. That includes those who save our children." At Denver Children's Hospital, the arrival of a critically ill child accompanied by a former military working dog created an unprecedented situation. Hospital administrators initially balked, citing policies and health regulations, but the flight medic's insistence on the dog's role in identifying Ethan's emergency condition gave them pause. "This animal detected a medical complication our equipment missed," he explained to the receiving team. "I'm documenting it as a medical necessity in my transfer report." While the administrators debated, Shadow took matters into his own paws. With military precision, he positioned himself under Ethan's bed in the pediatric ICU, making himself as unobtrusive as possible while maintaining his vigilant watch. The staff, busy stabilizing their new patient, tacitly allowed his presence while the bureaucratic questions were sorted out. By the time James arrived with Colonel Weber and Dr. Thompson, Shadow had been unofficially accepted by the PICU nurses, who recognized intuitively what the adults had been arguing about the shepherd's presence had a measurable, positive effect on Ethan's vital signs. "His numbers improve when the dog is close to him," the charge nurse informed them. "We're still waiting for administrative approval, but from a nursing perspective, though, that dog isn't going anywhere." Colonel Weber took charge of the situation, presenting the hospital administrators with hastily arranged paperwork designating Shadow as a therapy animal in federal service. The documentation, bearing the Department of Defense seal, was ambiguous enough to create confusion, but official enough to forestall immediate objections. While this drama unfolded, Dr. Sarah Thompson performed a more thorough examination of Shadow in a quiet corner of the waiting room. What she discovered sent her searching for James and Melissa. "Shadow's microchip isn't just a standard identification chip," she explained, showing them the scanner results. "It's a specialized military chip with embedded information. According to this, Shadow wasn't just any MPC, he was part of a classified program called Guardian." Colonel Weber joined their conversation, his expression grave. "That explains Miller's persistence. The Guardian program was highly classified. Only a handful of dogs were trained for it." "Trained for what exactly?" James asked. "Advanced medical detection," Weber explained. "These dogs were conditioned to detect minute changes in human physiology, infection, internal bleeding, even certain types of cancer. They were being developed to accompany special operations medics. That's how he knew about Ethan's chest infection," Melissa realized. "He wasn't just being protective, he was doing what he was trained to do." "Exactly," Weber confirmed. "And that training is worth millions to private contractors like Cerberus. They wouldn't just be getting a highly trained military dog, they'd be acquiring classified medical detection technology." The implications sank in. Shadow wasn't just a stolen military dog. He was carrying classified capabilities in his very training capabilities that had just saved Ethan's life for a second time. As Ethan stabilized in the PICU, Melissa and James maintained a constant vigil alongside Shadow. The shepherd's behavior continued to impress the medical staff. He remained quietly positioned under Ethan's bed during procedures, appeared alert but calm during physician rounds, and most remarkably, consistently alerted to subtle changes in Ethan's condition before the monitoring equipment detected them. On the third day at Denver Children's, the pulmonologist made her announcement The targeted antibiotics are working, his lungs are responding, and the infection is receding. Now, for the first time since the ordeal began, Melissa allowed herself to truly believe her son would recover completely. She found James in the hallway speaking quietly with Colonel Weber. "He's improving," she told them, tears of relief in her eyes. "The doctor says he could be off the ventilator as early as tomorrow." Their celebration was short-lived. Agent Miller had reappeared, this time accompanied by 2 military police officers and a new set of documents. "Colonel Weber," Miller said with barely concealed satisfaction, "I have orders signed by General Ramsey for the immediate seizure of military asset Shadow, codename Guardian 7. These MPs will escort the animal to a secure facility." Weber examined the papers carefully, his expression revealing nothing. "These appear to be in order," he finally acknowledged. "You can't be serious," James protested. "After everything that's happened, this dog saved Ethan's life twice." "The dog is government property carrying classified training," Miller stated coldly. "Sentimentality doesn't change that fact." As they argued, a nurse hurried from Ethan's room. "The dog is alerting again," she said urgently. "Something's happening with Ethan." All thoughts of legal jurisdiction were forgotten as they rushed back to the PICU. Shadow stood beside Ethan's bed, pawing insistently at the ventilator tubing, whining with uncharacteristic agitation. The attending physician quickly assessed the situation. "The tube is obstructed," he announced, already moving to correct the problem. "Good catch." Once again, Shadow had detected a life-threatening complication before the medical equipment could register it. Had the obstruction continued even minutes longer, Ethan could have suffered brain damage from oxygen deprivation. Miller watched the scene unfold, his determined expression faltering for the first time. The military police officers exchanged uncomfortable glances, clearly reluctant to remove an animal that had just saved a child from imminent danger. In that moment of hesitation, a new figure entered the PCU, a man in his 50s wearing the uniform of a 2-star general. His presence commanded immediate attention from everyone in the room, particularly the military personnel. "General Ramsey," Colonel Weber said, coming to attention. "At ease, Colonel," the general replied. He surveyed the scene, his gaze lingering on Shadow, who had returned to his position beside Ethan after the ventilator was cleared. "I came to see for myself what all the commotion is about." His eyes shifted to Agent Miller. "And to understand why one of my orders is being enforced with such zeal when I don't recall signing it." The color drained from Miller's face. "Sir, I have the documentation right here." "Your signature is apparently being applied to documents I've never seen," General Ramsey interrupted coldly. "A serious matter that will be investigated thoroughly." He turned back to Weber. "I received your report about Shadow's recovery and his assistance to the Wilson boy. Remarkable story." "Yes, sir," Weber agreed. "In my opinion, Shadow has demonstrated the full success of the Guardian program in a real-world application. His ability to detect medical emergencies has saved this child's life multiple times." General Ramsey approached Ethan's bed, observing Shadow's protective posture. "The bond is evident," he noted, "and extremely unusual for a Guardian-trained MPC." He looked at Melissa and James. "Your son appears to have accomplished what our best handlers couldn't. He's formed a genuine connection with one of our most specialized assets." "Ethan doesn't see an asset," Melissa said quietly. "He sees a friend who saved him." The general nodded thoughtfully. Sometimes the best military decisions come from recognizing when a mission has evolved beyond its original parameters. He straightened. Decision made. Colonel Weber, prepare retirement papers for Guardian 7, designation Shadow, full medical benefits and service recognition. Sir, Weber questioned, surprised by the sudden decision. This dog has completed his mission in the most exemplary manner possible, General Ramsey stated firmly. He's earned his retirement. He glanced at Miller. And I believe Cerberus operations will be otherwise occupied dealing with allegations of document forgery and interference with a DoD asset. As Miller was escorted from the hospital by his own military police, the atmosphere in the PICU transformed. For the first time in days, the cloud of uncertainty lifted. General Ramsey had one final question for Melissa and James. Assuming your son recovers as expected, would you be willing to provide a home for a retired military working dog? It comes with certain responsibilities. Shadow will need specialized care and understanding. Melissa and James exchanged a look of perfect understanding. We would be honored, James replied. Though I think Ethan made that decision days ago in the forest. As if understanding the conversation. Shadow's tail gave a single, decisive wag, the first sign of happiness anyone had seen from the stoic shepherd. The truth had finally prevailed. Shadow's journey from Afghanistan to Colorado, from military weapon to child's protector, was reaching its rightful conclusion. The dog who had wandered out of the shadows to save a lost boy had found, at last, a place to belong. 6 months later, on a crisp autumn morning, much like the one when Ethan had first gone missing, the Wilson family stood together on the porch of their new home. The modest ranch house sat on 5 acres at the edge of Pinecrest, with the mountains visible in the distance and plenty of open space for a boy and his dog to explore. Don't go past the creek, Melissa reminded Ethan as he prepared to head out for his morning adventure with Shadow. At 6 years old now, her son had recovered completely from his ordeal. Though she noticed he no longer wandered far alone, Shadow was always by his side, a constant guardian with military precision and a newfound gentleness. We won't, Ethan promised, adjusting the small backpack that contained his emergency inhaler, a water bottle, and a 2-way radio concessions to parents who had nearly lost him once before. Shadow stood at attention beside the boy, his coat now glossy and full, his once gaunt frame filled out to healthy proportions. The shepherd's remaining eye was bright and alert, constantly scanning their surroundings. Only the empty socket, now less prominently scarred thanks to Dr. Thompson's reconstructive surgery, served as a reminder of his difficult past. Back for lunch, James added, stepping onto the porch from inside the house. The past months had brought changes for him as well. After Ethan's recovery, James had requested a transfer to the ranger station nearest Pinecrest. He now lived in the guest cottage behind the main house, not quite a full reconciliation with Melissa, but a step toward rebuilding the family that Shadow had helped save. As Ethan and Shadow set off across the meadow that comprised their front yard, Melissa leaned against the porch railing beside her ex-husband. "He's doing so well," she observed. "Both of them are." James nodded. Shadow's transition to pet life has been smoother than anyone expected. Colonel Weber says it's almost unprecedented for a dog with his training. "I don't think he sees himself as a pet," Melissa replied, watching the pair in the distance. "More like he's been reassigned to a new mission, Ethan." The changes in their lives had been substantial since that fateful day in the forest. After Ethan's recovery and discharge from Denver Children's Hospital, Shadow's retirement from military service had been expedited with unusual efficiency. General Ramsey himself had attended the small ceremony at Fort Carson, where Shadow received his official honorable discharge and service medals. The subsequent investigation into Cerberus operations had revealed a widespread scheme to appropriate military working dogs for private security and, more disturbingly, organized dog-fighting rings that catered to wealthy underground clients. Agent Miller now faced federal charges, along with several executives from the contractor company. Shadow's adjustment to civilian life had progressed in stages. The first weeks had been challenging as the shepherd maintained his vigilant protection of Ethan, reluctant to let the boy out of his sight even for short periods. Dr. Thompson had worked closely with the family, helping them understand Shadow's perspective and needs. "He's been in survival mode for years," she had explained. "It will take time for him to trust that he's truly safe, that Ethan is safe, and that he doesn't need to be on high alert every moment." Gradually, with patience and consistent routines, Shadow had begun to relax. The first time they saw him actually play tentatively chasing a ball Ethan had thrown had been a breakthrough moment that brought tears to Melissa's eyes. Colonel Weber visited monthly, partly to check on Shadow's adjustment and partly, Melissa suspected, because he had grown fond of both the dog and the family. He had been instrumental in arranging for Shadow's specialized veterinary care to be covered by the military as part of his retirement, benefits an unusual arrangement that recognized the shepherd's exceptional service. The Secretary of the Army took a personal interest in Shadow's case after the story reached Washington. Weber had explained, "It seems even hardened Pentagon officials aren't immune to a tale of a military dog saving a child." The story had indeed spread far beyond Pinecrest. National media had picked up on the remarkable rescue, though General Ramsey had ensured that details of Shadow's specialized training remained classified to the public. Shadow was simply a former military working dog who had somehow found his way to Colorado and saved a lost boy remarkable enough without revealing his connection to the Guardian program. Pinecrest itself had embraced Shadow as a local hero. Mayor Hampton had declared an official Shadow Day in June, complete with a small parade where the shepherd had walked solemnly beside Ethan, seemingly bemused by the attention, but tolerating it with military stoicism. Perhaps the most meaningful change had been in James and Melissa's relationship, the near loss of their son, followed by the weeks of shared vigil during his recovery, had created space for healing conversations, long postponed. "I was so focused on my career, on being the perfect ranger," James had admitted during one late-night conversation at the hospital. "I thought providing for you both meant being the best at my job, even if it meant I was hardly ever home. And I threw myself into the clinic after you left." Melissa had responded, "It was easier to save other creatures than to face what we'd lost." "My?" They weren't back together in the traditional sense, but they had found a new configuration of family, one that centered around their son and included, improbably but perfectly, a one-eyed former military dog with a classified past. Now, watching Ethan and Shadow explore the meadow in the morning sunlight, Melissa felt a contentment she hadn't experienced in years. "Do you think he remembers?" she asked suddenly. "Being lost in the forest." James considered the question. I think he remembers enough to be cautious, but not enough to be afraid. That's a gift. Really. Shadow remembers, Melissa said softly. You can see it in the way he watches Ethan, especially in the woods. He's always positioning himself between Ethan and the deeper forest. Some instincts never fade, James agreed, for either of them. Across the meadow, Ethan had discovered something interesting near the tree line. Shadow stood beside him, head tilted as the boy examined a cluster of late wildflowers. The morning sun caught the shepherd's profile, illuminating him against the backdrop of golden autumn leaves. I've been thinking, James said hesitantly. The guest cottage works for now, but maybe we should consider other arrangements, for Ethan's sake. Melissa turned to study his face, noting the vulnerability there, something the confident ranger had rarely shown during their marriage. What kind of arrangements? I'm not suggesting we go back to how things were, he clarified quickly. But maybe we could try being a family again. In a new way, one day at a time. Before Melissa could respond, Shadow's distinctive alert bark drew their attention. The shepherd had positioned himself protectively beside Ethan, who was waving excitedly. Mom, Dad, come see, the boy called. We found a turtle. James smiled. Duty calls. Shall we? Together they crossed the meadow toward their son and his faithful guardian, whatever the future held for them as a family. Shadow had given them this second chance, this opportunity to rebuild what had been broken, to create something stronger from the fragments of their past. As they reached Ethan, Shadow relaxed his alert stance, acknowledging their arrival with a subtle shift in posture. The shepherd had learned to share his protective duties, to trust that the boy's parents were part of his mission now. Look, Ethan said excitedly, pointing to a small box turtle making its slow way through the grass. Shadow found him. He didn't even bark at it or anything. He just showed me really gently. James knelt beside his son, studying the turtle. That's because Shadow understands what needs protection, he said, placing a hand on the shepherd's back. He's very smart that way. The smartest dog ever, Ethan declared with absolute conviction. Shadow accepted the compliment with military dignity, though Melissa noticed the subtle signs of contentment in his relaxed ears and soft gaze. The shepherd who had once known only duty and survival was learning something new belonging. That evening, as darkness fell over their home, the family gathered on the porch. Ethan sat on the steps with Shadow pressed against his side, both of them watching the first stars appear. James and Melissa sat in rocking chairs, the comfortable silence between them a healing of its own. Sometimes I think about what would have happened if Shadow hadn't found me, Ethan said suddenly. In the forest. Melissa felt her heart constrict at the thought, but James answered before she could find words. But he did find you, he said simply. That's what matters. Ethan nodded, satisfied with this wisdom. He wrapped his arm around Shadow's neck, and the shepherd responded by resting his head on the boy's lap. In the quiet of the evening, Melissa reflected on the improbable journey that had brought them all together. A lost boy, a wounded warrior dog, a fractured family all found and healed through an act of instinctive compassion in the wilderness. Shadow had wandered for years, surviving on his training and instincts, until something deeper had called him to that forest edge on the day of the autumn festival. Whatever name science might give to such knowing instinct, training, or something more mysterious, Melissa was simply grateful for it. As the stars multiplied overhead, Shadow kept his silent vigil beside Ethan, his one eye reflecting the celestial light. The dog who had emerged from the shadows had brought them all into a brighter place, a place of second chances and renewed hope. From his warm place at Ethan's side, Shadow surveyed his domain with the satisfaction of a mission fulfilled. The boy was safe. The pack was together. All was as it should be, as the one-eyed guardian had finally found his way home, in a world that often moves too fast, leaving loyal hearts behind. Shadow's story reminds us of what truly matters. This one-eyed shepherd, abandoned after serving his country faithfully, shows us that our scars don't define our capacity to love and protect. Like many of us who've weathered life's storms, Shadow found purpose when he was needed most, curled protectively around a lost child, giving warmth when he had none to spare. Remember when neighbors looked out for each other's children, when sacrifice wasn't questioned, but offered freely. Shadow embodies these timeless values. His journey from battlefield to family guardian